Hey everyone, this is Dylan, and today I'm going to be kicking it old school, kind of. So I haven't done one of these videos in quite a while, but I'm going to bring back a series called Cancel Too Soon. And for this episode, I'll be doing a review of the show Mockingbird Lane. So Mockingbird Lane was Bryan Fuller's adaptation of the Munsters. He wanted to do a new adaptation and kind of bring a little bit more of a human element to it. All of the characters had been redesigned to look a little bit more human, and he wanted to go for a little bit of a darker tone. And so this was actually kind of a test. I believe that it aired on NBC, and they decided that they were going to see how well the pilot did and then decide whether or not they were going to order a full series. So let's get into what the episode was about, because this was a singular episode and that's all we got for the show. So let's get into what this episode was about. So we basically have the Munster family, and what happens is Eddie Munster, who is a werewolf, and he's probably, I don't know, maybe like 10, and he's part of a Boy Scout troop, and apparently this has been happening pretty frequently where he goes on this camping trips with the Boy Scouts and ends up turning into a werewolf and attacking. And every time this happens, they have to move. So after Eddie Munster attacks his Boy Scout troop, they decide to move to San Francisco. So they move into this house, which the locals have called the House of Poisoned Hobos, because apparently they had found a bunch of dead homeless people in the house and around the house from the previous owner who had poisoned all of these homeless people. The basic premise of the rest of this episode is Grandpa wants to tell Eddie that he is a werewolf because Herman and Lily haven't told him that he's a werewolf, so he doesn't know. He just thinks that it was a baby bear attack that caused the attack on the Boy Scouts. So it's basically mostly Herman and Grandpa getting into arguments about whether or not they're going to tell Eddie what he really is. And because this was canceled after the first episode, we do kind of end on a cliffhanger. Let's talk about Bryan Fuller. So he is the creator. He kind of has this Fullerverse, is what fans of Bryan Fuller like to call it, and it's a connected universe of all of the shows that he is a creator of. Mockingbird Lane falls right into the Fullerverse, and so we have characters that pop up from Wonder Falls, which I've done a review of, and I'll leave a little iCard up to that if you are interested. But I think that it's really cool, and I also really like Bryan Fuller's style. He's a very stylistic director and creator, so we have this almost surreal, and I would almost say that it's kind of like a Tim Burton-esque style, where everything's a little bit vibrant and it's a little old school, kind of like the design is old school. I don't know, I just really like the style of his work. Now let's talk about the Munsters. The Munsters is like an old show about a family of monsters. And I think I've seen a couple episodes of the Munsters. It wasn't one that I watched all the time, but I probably have seen a few episodes with my dad. I don't really remember a ton. I know what they look like, or at least I know what Herman Munster looks like in the Munsters. I don't really remember Grandpa or Eddie or any of those. Well, I do kind of remember Eddie because he has the widow's peak haircut. Other than that, I don't really remember a whole lot. So this was a new introduction for me, which I think that's kind of what the premise of the show was. Reintroduce the Munsters to a modern day audience and a new generation. And so I really do appreciate that. And now let's get into all of the individual Munsters and what I think about them. So we have Herman Munster, and this is basically the main character of this first episode. He's played by Jerry O'Connell, and he's pretty great in this role. I think that he did a very good job. And the only thing that I didn't like was, I didn't like some of the design elements of the Herman Munster makeup. I think that having, like, he had a scar around his neck, I think that that was pretty cool. But there's a couple scenes where he's, like, completely shirtless, and I don't know, I don't like the way that it looks necessarily. So that's a bit unfortunate. But overall, I thought that Jerry O'Connell and the character of Herman Munster were pretty great in this episode. We then have Lily Munster, and she is played by Portia de Rossi, and we really don't get a ton of Lily Munster in this. I couldn't really tell you a whole lot about the character because we don't really have a ton to go off of for this character. We also have Marilyn, and Marilyn's kind of like the normal, I think she's like a cousin or something like that, but she also was barely in this, so we didn't really get a whole lot of her. And then the other two big characters in this were Grandpa is played by Eddie Izzard, and he is pretty great in this role. I think he probably has one of the like bigger roles in this episode, and I think that he's kind of like almost like this fun grandpa, but also is like a little devious and has his own agenda compared to the rest of the family. And I think that that adds for a good juxtaposition between him and Herman and the way that they kind of want to go about things, because Herman wants Eddie to be a normal kid while Grandpa wants him to know that he is a werewolf. And then we have Eddie, and Eddie's okay. He isn't in this episode a whole lot, but the episode does revolve around him because he is kind of the crux of this episode where they're trying to figure out if they should tell him what's going on. I think he understands that what's going on with the family, but I don't think he knows himself that he is a werewolf. I also really liked that this had high production value. The sets looked really cool. The house that they lived in was really cool looking. And the production value was just really high. I think if this were to have continued on into a show, it would have been really cool and had very high production values. Almost similar to the Hannibal production value and how Hannibal was like crazy production value. This I could see having the same, if not better, production value than that. And so, as a test for this episode, they aired it right before Halloween in 2012. The episode ended up with 5.47 million viewers. And that's kind of low. I don't know exactly what they were expecting. I don't know how this was necessarily marketed. If it was marketed as like a television movie, or if it was marketed as an episode, or like a one-off, because I think that that would have depended on whether or not people would have tuned in, because I know I had known, I think I did watch it when I was on TV, but I think that I would have thought that it was kind of weird if it was just going to be a one-off and then never be able to watch the rest of the story. So it did end up getting canceled. They just decided not to do it, and I think that partly it might have been a good idea because it was directed by Bryan Singer, who has a lot of controversies himself, and I'm not going to go into them, but unfortunately that is a bit of a bad mark against this. But I did like it. I do think that it would have been really cool if it would have went forward. Right now it's like super hard to find. I really don't know why, but it's kind of been just buried, probably maybe because of the Bryan Singer relation. But I do wish that they would at least put it somewhere so that people can find it pretty easily. So my rating of this episode was a 3 out of 5 stars. I thought that it was alright, and I think that I would have liked it a lot better probably if it had continued on. So I guess to answer the question, was it canceled too soon? Yeah, I think it was. And they really don't do this kind of weird model that they did for this, where they aired the pilot and then was like, well, if it does well, we'll pick it up to a full series. They don't do that, so it just seems like a kind of a weird thing. Usually they order the entire series, they have the first season, and then if it doesn't do well, then it gets canceled. So I'm not quite sure why they did that specifically for this show. I kind of wish that we would have got a full season, so then we could at least have a larger story, but I don't know. I do wish that it was continued on. So that is it for this review. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know in the comments down below what you thought, if you've seen Mockingbird Lane, whether you liked it or you didn't like it, and why. And remember, if you're not already subscribed and you'd like to be, please hit that subscribe button down below and give this video a like if you liked it. Thank you guys for watching and have a great day. Bye.